Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. So today is Wednesday, September 19th, 2018, and we're going to go through the latest polls from today. So there were some new polls out of a couple of states, Massachusetts, Maryland, Texas, New Mexico, and then basically national polls in terms of any pretty much covered polling area. So first of all, we're going to talk about the Massachusetts Senate race. This was a pretty slow polling day. All of these results were pretty much expected except for the two House races, with those again don't have as much as a national implication as the governor race would in terms of backlash against a president with a popular incumbent, or a Senate race, which actually does impact the nationwide national composition of the United States Senate. So that actually truly has national implications. Yes, the House of Representatives maps do, but singular House races probably aren't going to be the make or break for the Democrats or the Republicans in 2018. Whereas one singular Senate race definitely could, and one governor race in the NGA could as well. 50 seats. In terms of, I guess, 50 states, actually, there are governorships outside of the states. But in terms of the Senate, 100 seats compared to 435. So obviously a lot more weight on the Senate and not as much on the governor races, but they still are something that pretty much show if the state itself is turning away from the president. But also those races are definitely about candidates. So enough talking about that. We'll jump right into it. Again, the Massachusetts Senate race, this one is pretty easy. Elizabeth Warren leads by 30%. I don't understand why anyone would expect anything less than that. She is a pretty popular candidate in the state itself, pretty known nationwide. Not saying that she would win a presidential election, but she definitely is considering one for 2020. I mean, to be completely honest with you, many Democrats are considering a 2020 run. Obviously, I don't talk to them personally, and I don't know personally, but you can pretty much say that people like Warren and Sanders and Biden are probably considering 2020 presidential runs, especially seeing at the rate the president is going in terms of electability. And they said the same thing in 2016, so we'll see how 2020 enters and ends. So the Maryland Senate race, this is actually from my home state. They also polled Massachusetts governor and Maryland governor, but overall, the Maryland Senate race, Ben Cardin leads by 39%. We do have an independent candidate, Neil Simon, who is gaining 8% of the vote, but that's mainly from Republican voters right now. The Republican there has 17%, so don't expect much for the GOP there. Obviously, two Democratic states, Massachusetts and Maryland. You would never expect a GOP candidate to win statewide. Well, that's exactly what's happening in these two polls that were taken by the same polling companies as they took in the Senate poll. So, in Massachusetts governor race, Baker versus Gonzalez. Charlie Baker leads by 29%, only 3 points off what a Democratic incumbent Senate candidate named Elizabeth Warren is leading statewide. Keep in mind, these are the same group of voters that are Democrats now voting for a Republican. Same thing in my home state of Maryland. The governor's race here is very, very contested in the minds of Democrats. I've seen many Democrats think that the Maryland race is getting closer. In all reality, it pretty much isn't. Ben Jealous hasn't really gained any voters since the primaries. I mean, sure, he possibly gained a couple. If we look at the averages statewide, and the reason why I'm talking about Maryland more than Massachusetts is because I know the state of Maryland a little bit better, but he was polling a little bit better before. Washington Post shows him at 39%, 36%, and now down to 32%. And yes, this was a huge win for progressives in the primaries, but not so much in terms of the general election. Yes, I was on the campaign for my governor, but overall, that really doesn't change the way that I view this race. I truly believe that Larry Hogan will edge out this race, mainly because Ben Jealous has failed to capture a number of voters and failed to capture a number of endorsements by the National Democratic Party. And I understand the argument that he's a progressive candidate and that he shouldn't expect it anyway, but this is Maryland. This is a Clinton state. Not only a presidential election, but in the primary elections. This is an Obama state. This is an establishment Democratic state. We have Steny Hoyer from my congressional district, the second most influential Democrat in the House of Representatives, right behind Nancy Pelosi. So overall, again, this race is built off of endorsements from establishment Democrats, and Ben Jealous really isn't getting it. Yes, there were some notable figures. Biden enters the race with his endorsement. But again, when it comes down to the former governor candidates, not many endorsed Ben Jealous. Statewide elected officials from the Democratic Party didn't endorse Ben Jealous at all. And the fact that this race is currently rated as likely Republican, while we already have Senate races and House races on the same ballot, doesn't mean that any of these voters are pretty much flipping their ticket. So at this point in time, Maryland is pretty safe for the GOP in terms of the governor race. Same thing in Massachusetts. So since I discussed the state of Maryland, we have to discuss the state of Massachusetts. Again, Massachusetts probably the most Democratic state in the union in terms of House composition and in terms of the 2016 election results. Charlie Baker now leading by 33.5% on average. Granted, there weren't as many polls, but the most recent one shows him ahead by 27%. Jane Gonzalez, yes, has gained 8% in voters, and Charlie Baker has gone down 5%. But when you're leading by 27%, it really doesn't matter. Leading by 1% to 27%, you still win the race nonetheless. And this is a Republican winning in Massachusetts. Keep that in mind. The Senate races are nothing too out of the normal, and neither are these governor races. It's just very interesting. And many people do not expect these two races to even go to the GOP, because they are Democratic states. I get that, but I see comments time and time again of people trying to tell me that these races are safe for the Democrats because they were in the presidential election or are in the Senate election. That's not how some of these elections work, especially with very popular governors. Charlie Baker and Larry Hogan, both of which the top two most popular governors in the United States. Keep that in mind. Now for the House races, we don't have much to see here. In the Texas 7th District, the Republican leading by 3%. In the New Mexico 2nd District, the Democrat leads by 1%. So that's a poll I actually trust. The New York Times, I do think of as a reputable source and reputable pollster. But overall, these two new recent polls are showing conflicting data. I guess the average, you would say that the GOP candidate is leading, but this is a toss-up race. It can pretty much go any way. And I would trust the New York Times just a little bit more because they do show their live results and exactly where they're getting their information from, and it isn't as vague as something like the Albuquerque Journal, which may be more local, but may not be as clear in terms of where they're getting their numbers from, whereas the New York Times literally publishes it live as they come in. So in the New Mexico Senate race right now, we have a very contested race. This is a race that is currently held by the GOP. Keep that in mind. I believe it was held by the Democrats back in 2008, but pretty much has been a GOP congressional district. There's a majority Hispanic population district, which means that it does have possibilities of going to the Democrats, which is why polling is being done here, and which is why it's a toss-up district. Right now, this poll shows the Democrat ahead. Not the worst thing, but also not the worst thing for the GOP either, because still many undecided voters in a pretty Republican district compared to the other two districts in the state of New Mexico. For the Texas 7th District, this one is currently rated as, let's go ahead and check it, let's see, as a toss-up race. So right now there's an incumbent who's currently leading by 3%, again with undecided voters, which could typically lean to the GOP, especially with a GOP incumbent. But again, this is not good news for the GOP, nor is it really for the Democrats. Them being behind in polling doesn't really help, but the close race is also something to note. Overall, all these polls aren't showing anything too unexpected. Maybe these House races are probably the most shocking results. But Maryland, Massachusetts, in terms of the Senate and governor races, were both expected to go to the Democrats and Republicans, respectively. For these House races, again, a little bit more contested data, but still with undecided voters. Something to note, whereas all these Senate and governor polls, all of these voters are above 50%, which means that this race pretty much can go anyway. For the Democrats in terms of gaining undecided voters and still go to these respective candidates, or same thing goes for the Republicans for the Democrats. That sounded a little confusing, but let's just move on to the President Trump job approval. So right now, Economist.YouGov shows disapprove +9, and then disapprove +5, and then disapprove +5. Here's what's interesting. Rasmussen actually agrees with some other pollsters in terms of the disapproval rating, but not so much the approval rating. Still one of the higher ones, but other ones still possibly underestimating the president there. At a 47% approval rating, Rasmussen is consistent in their polling. I believe they actually may do it every day. They haven't really been shown on this average too many times, mainly because they do it way too much. But right now they show the disapprove +5, disapprove +5, and disapprove +9. That's not too bad for the president. Still not gaining that much, but being around 44% is not the worst thing either. But the congressional vote done by the same pollsters, Democrats +5 by Rasmussen, that's also something to note as well. If you're going to take the Rasmussen poll and say the president has a 47% approval rating, you also have to admit that Democrats are leading 5% nationwide because it was done by the same poll, same voting group, and that definitely does impact the way that we look at these polls. Because again, a lot of people like to take these approval polls and shine them and just show them with, use them as a reputable source. And yes, they are reputable sources. However, they also show conflicting data with something you also might suggest. You may say that there's going to be a Republican wave, but this poll shows the Democrats ahead by 5. You can disregard it if you want. Nobody's stopping you. It just makes it seem like you may not trust the data. But if you're not trusting the data from the same exact poll, why trust the data for the President Trump approval rating? So overall, a lot of people just like to pick and choose what they choose. Whoa, that sounded weird. Pick and choose the data that they want to show for their argument, or just what agrees with them or not. And that definitely does alter the way that our political discourse should be going, because a lot of people, again, like to hype up Rasmussen Reports as the most accurate pollster in 2016, but don't like to admit that the Democrats are leading by 5% nationwide. Yes, it does narrow down at some points in time, but as of today, the Democrats are ahead by 5% according to Rasmussen. Overall, if we look at the congressional job approval. This is never good for Congress, so there isn't much to see there. And the direction of the country has actually altered in the favor of the right direction since Trump's election, so that's something good as well. Not for good for Trump, but also good for the country, because a lot of Americans are starting to rebound from where they were before in terms of improving the country itself. There is a new poll from the state of Texas. I can't cover it now because it's not on 538, so I will cover it likely tomorrow when it does get there, or if they just put it on. But it shows Beto O'Rourke leading by 2%. This is the first time we've seen a race where the Democrats are leading in Texas. This is the first time we've seen a Democrat lead from, I believe, maybe 2012 or before then. None of these polls ever show the Democrats ahead. The most was a tie between O'Rourke and Cruz. The most was a 3% lead for Trump against Hillary Clinton. There was never really a point where the Democrats did lead. So this new poll showing O'Rourke ahead by 2% with a conflicting poll from yesterday showing Cruz ahead by 9% could show a little bit of conflicting data, but overall, just something to note for a possibility in tomorrow's video. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.